A few hours passed and by now it was quiet behind the door. Neither 𝒖𝒔𝒄 nor Iwaizumi made a sound. Both were lost in thoughts that just broke their souls. Iwaizumi was torn from his thoughts when he suddenly heard a phone vibrating from the living room. His phone was in his pocket, so it had to be 𝒖𝒂𝒄's. He sighed and got up to see who it was. Mattsun was calling. He took the phone and went into the kitchen so 𝒖𝒂𝒄 wouldn't hear him. He took a quick breath and then answered it. Is it important? Iwa? Well, hello to you too. Did something happen? 𝒖𝒂𝒄 was supposed to meet me and Maki an hour ago. Iwaizumi didn't say anything. Iwaizumi? He was shaking. He frowned and leaned against the counter. Iwaizumi, what's wrong? He found the ring. He found what? The engagement ring. 𝒂𝒐𝒉𝒆𝒔. He found what? Iwaizumi could hear Maki in the background. Maki snatched the phone from Mattsun's hand and spoke to Iwaizumi now. Where is 𝒖𝒂𝒄? He locked himself in the bathroom. We're coming over. Iwaizumi could hear Mattsun slapping Maki on the back of his head and snatching the phone from his hand again. We're not coming over. Can you handle it? I'll try. Iwaizumi sighed and hung up. He took the phone back to the living room and settled back on the floor in front of the door. He leaned back. Matsuko and Hanamaki knew that Iwaizumi actually wanted to propose to 𝒖𝒂𝒄 at that time. That's also one of the reasons why Maki was so upset when 𝒖𝒂𝒄 admitted that he still had feelings for Iwaizumi. Kava, let me in. 𝒖𝒂𝒄 was lost. His thoughts were literally eating him up. His whole world was crashing down on him. His gaze was stiff. Tears rolled down his face, but somehow he didn't feel anything right now. His body was there, but his mind felt empty. After a while, he unlocked the door. Iwaizumi's eyes widened. He immediately stood up but hesitated for a moment before going to 𝒖𝒂𝒄. Then he slowly opened the door. He found 𝒖𝒂𝒄 sitting on the floor. Legs bent, back against the bathtub, gaze lowered to the ring. He said nothing. Iwaizumi gulped and exhaled deeply. He sat down next to 𝒖𝒂𝒄 and looked at him, but 𝒖𝒂𝒄 didn't pay him a glance. Iwaizumi frowned. Never in his life had he seen 𝒖𝒂𝒄 like this. He was devastated. Iwaizumi's heart was racing. He didn't know what to say because he was scared of making things worse. But he couldn't leave 𝒖𝒂𝒄 to his thoughts either. 𝒖𝒂𝒄 was prone to overthinking things, and Iwaizumi could only imagine how much that was breaking him. Iwaizumi whispered, "Talk to me." But 𝒖𝒂𝒄 remained silent. He didn't even know why he had unlocked the door. Probably to show Iwaizumi that he was still alive. 𝒖𝒂𝒄's thoughts ate him up. At that moment, he was too busy with himself to be able to talk to Iwaizumi. Of course, 𝒖𝒂𝒄 blamed himself for everything. He loved Iwaizumi, he always did. To see that he had thrown away everything they had together because he only thought about himself and his volleyball career gave him the rest. He couldn't believe how selfish he was. Iwaizumi lifted 𝒖𝒂𝒄's chin and turned his face to him, so that he had to look him in the eyes. Iwaizumi froze at that sight. 𝒖𝒂𝒄's eyes were empty and completely devoid of emotion. He was torn. Both were breathing deeply but calmly. They looked into each other's eyes for a moment and remained silent. Then 𝒖𝒂𝒄 turned his head away from Iwaizumi again and stared at the ring. More tears began to pour. He felt the panic spreading inside again. His breathing became faster and heavier. Suddenly he put the ring down and stood up. "Hey, where are you going? I have to get out of here." Mindlessly, 𝒖𝒂𝒄 rushed out of Iwaizumi's apartment. He couldn't breathe, it felt like he was suffocating. Shit. Iwaizumi quickly got up, grabbed the keys and a jacket, and ran after 𝒖𝒂𝒄. 𝒖𝒂𝒄's mind was lost. He was shaking, his vision blurred from tears, and he was somehow trying to get out of the house. He pushed the door open and rushed outside to take a deep breath, but it was all in vain. He kept running. He just wanted to get out of here. "I've ruined our friendship. I've wrecked our future. I am to blame for everything. I don't deserve someone like you, Iwa. I'm so pathetic. I'm 𝒖𝒂𝒄." 𝒖𝒂𝒄 was snapped out of his thoughts when he suddenly heard a honking car and screeching tires. In the last moment, Iwaizumi grabbed 𝒖𝒂𝒄's wrist and pulled him back from the road into his arms. He was so lost in thoughts that he almost got run over. He was no longer aware of his surroundings. Iwaizumi hugged 𝒖𝒂𝒄 tightly in his arms. Fuck. Iwaizumi was shaking all over, just realizing himself what almost happened. 𝒖𝒂𝒄's heart was racing, his eyes were wide open and he was completely shocked. "Let go of me." Iwaizumi flinched as 𝒖𝒂𝒄 spoke. He slowly let go of him and looked at him in agony. "The only thing you feel for me is pity, isn't it? What? I'm such an idiot." 𝒖𝒂𝒄. 𝒖𝒂𝒄 turned around and was about to walk away when suddenly Iwaizumi grabbed his hand again. This time, however, 𝒖𝒂𝒄 immediately tore himself away. "Let me go." He yelled at Iwaizumi, who at first looked at him in shock and intimidation. Tears welled up in Ikoa's eyes. He turned around again and was about to leave when Iwaizumi suddenly grabbed him by the wrists and pushed him against the wall of a house, pressing his lips against Ikoa's. Both now gave free rein to their tears. Iwaizumi deepened the kiss and didn't give Ikoa a chance to move from the spot. Ikoa tried to gasp, but Iwaizumi didn't let go of the kiss. Instead, he deepened it more and more, letting the makeout session turn desperate and needy. Suddenly, Ikoa pushed him backwards. Both gasping for air, Ikoa wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and scowled at Iwaizumi. Iwaizumi returned a dark look to him. "Is this what pity looks like to you?" Iwaizumi was completely out of breath and he was pissed. Pissed at how the whole situation escalated. Pissed at himself. Pissed at Ikoa for leaving him back then. Ikoa tried to catch his breath again and remained silent for a moment, panting. He lashed out and slapped Iwaizumi. Ikoa was still out of breath, but slowly came back to his senses. Iwaizumi didn't fight back and looked deep into Ikoa's eyes again. Into the lost, tired, sad eyes. Ikoa took a few more deep breaths until he fell over Iwaizumi again. He pressed his lips against Iwaizumi's and swung his arms around his neck. Iwaizumi returned the kiss and pulled Ikoa tighter and tighter into his arms. He ran his fingers through Ikoa's hair and deepened the kiss more and more. All their emotions were in that kiss. Passion, despair, longing. Tears were running down their faces. They were out of breath. It was terribly cold, but they couldn't let go of each other. This should never end. After a while they pulled away from each other, both gasping for air. Iwaizumi admired Ikoa while their foreheads were pressed together. He wiped a few strands of hair from his face and spoke softly. "I won't let you go. Iwa-chan." Ikoa grabbed Iwaizumi's wrist and looked at him sadly. Iwaizumi kissed Ikoa gently and pulled him into another hug. He whispered in his ear, "I never stopped loving you, Toru." Ikoa's eyes widened. He hugged Iwaizumi even tighter. His heart was racing, his eyes tired from crying. He took a deep breath and exhaled with a small sad smile on his face. "Don't let me go, Iwa-chan." Both buried their heads in the shoulder of the other. They stayed like that for a while and tried to calm down. Iwaizumi could feel how much Ikoa was shivering. This was mostly caused by the fact that he was overwhelmed by all his feelings and also because Ikoa ran out wearing just his t-shirt. Iwaizumi disengaged from the embrace and picked up the jacket from the ground that he had grabbed earlier. He wrapped Ikoa in another kiss as he pulled the jacket over him. Then he slowly let go. "Let's go inside." Back in the apartment, Iwaizumi locked the door behind him. He winced briefly when he suddenly felt Ikoa's head pressed against his back. "I'm sorry." Ikoa's voice was very quiet. Iwaizumi turned around and Ikoa immediately fell into his arms. On the one hand, he didn't want to let go of Iwaizumi, and on the other hand, his body was just extremely weak by now. His breathing was very shallow. Iwaizumi was quite worried. He noticed that Ikoa had no more strength and was keeping conscious with effort. "Hold on to me, I'll carry you to bed." Ikoa blushed, but he didn't care. He put his arms around Iwaizumi's neck and Iwaizumi lifted him up. Ikoa clasped his feet behind his back and let his head rest on Iwaizumi's shoulder. Iwaizumi carried Ikoa into the bedroom and then carefully laid him down onto the bed. As he was about to get up again, Ikoa's hand slid to his sweater and he pulled Iwaizumi's face a little closer to his. Iwaizumi blushed. "Hajime." Iwaizumi gave Ikoa a warm smile. He leaned forward a bit more and pressed his lips to Ikoa's. They deepened the kiss, which made it incredibly difficult for Ikoa to stay conscious as he could barely breathe. He was so weak, but he didn't want to let Iwaizumi go. A tear rolled down his face and Iwaizumi slowly broke away from the kiss. He wiped the tear away from Ikoa and admired him for a moment. Then he gave him a kiss on the forehead. "I'll get us something to eat." Ikoa rolled onto his side and watched Iwaizumi leave the room. He tried to keep his eyes open, but it was getting harder and harder. Ikoa was at his end. "I love you, Iwa-chan." Ikoa saw Iwaizumi come back into the room with a large bowl. It smelled wonderful. A pleasant feeling spread through Ikoa. "That smells good." Ikoa smiled faintly and closed his eyes. He felt Iwaizumi caress his face, but he couldn't manage to open his eyes anymore. Ikoa was so exhausted that it knocked him out. Ikoa slowly opened his eyes. He was still incredibly weak and off track. Ikoa found himself waking up in the arms of Iwaizumi. He felt his warmth, his closeness. Ikoa snuggled a little closer to Iwaizumi. He made him feel incredibly good. Iwaizumi squeezed him a little tighter. "Looks like the beauty has woken up." Iwaizumi spoke in a sleepy voice. Ikoa slowly raised his head and looked tiredly into Iwaizumi's eyes. He smiled. "Hey. Hey. Iwaizumi pressed his hand to Ikoa's forehead. You have a fever. Ikoa was completely startled. Fever? Oh, that's right. I rushed out earlier in just a t-shirt. You slept through almost a whole day. For a day. Ikoa was shocked. Was he that messed up? Iwaizumi chuckled, running his fingers through Ikoa's hair. Let me get you something to eat and drink. Ikoa looked at Iwaizumi perplexed. Iwaizumi gave Ikoa a kiss on the forehead and then stood up. Iwa-chan. Iwaizumi turned to Ikoa before walking out of the room. Am I dreaming? Iwaizumi laughed and shook his head. Ikoa leaned against the back of the bed and looked after Iwaizumi in confusion. As Iwaizumi came back, he brought Ikoa some food and a bottle of water. Thank you for the meal. Iwaizumi sat down next to Ikoa and smiled. Can you even remember everything? Ikoa looked at Iwaizumi a little confused. His cheeks were stuffed with food. I know Iwa. Iwaizumi snapped his fingers against Ikoa's forehead. Ikoa pouted and looked at him in annoyance. Stop talking with your mouth full and swallow first. Ikoa swallowed and then started again. His look became a little sad. I know I ran outside because everything here overwhelmed me. Ikoa put the bowl aside and looked at Iwaizumi. His eyes widened as he noticed the red spot on his face. Fuck, I slapped you. Iwaizumi laughed while Ikoa looked at him in horror. It's okay, I deserved it. Ikoa looked at Iwaizumi with concern. He remembered again. The ring. The kiss outside. Everything. Ikoa's face turned even redder, his heart began to pound, and he lowered his gaze. Iwaizumi lifted Ikoa's chin so he could look him straight in the eyes. Do you remember what I told you afterwards? Ikoa felt his heart beating faster and faster, as if it was about to explode out of his chest. I never stopped loving you, Toru. Ikoa's eyes widened as Iwaizumi locked his lips with Ikoa's. Such a sweet, comforting kiss. He then broke away, but the faces were still close to each other. It's true. How could I have ever stopped loving you, Toru? Ikoa's eyes sparkled, and he embraced Iwaizumi, hugging him tightly. Ikoa whispered. Why did you kiss me? Now you're getting sick too. Iwaizumi smiled. I just couldn't resist. Ikoa broke away from the embrace and gave Iwaizumi a warm smile, but it quickly disappeared. Ikoa frowned. What? Iwa-chan, I'm scared. Iwaizumi tilted his head and frowned as well. I feel so stupid for ruining our relationship. We could have been happily married now. Would we really have been happy? Ikoa looked at Iwaizumi in confusion. Maybe everything was right the way it turned out. Would you be where you are today? Would I be where I am today? We held each other back. I understood that, Carver. Maybe it just needed this blast, so that we both could live our lives, and maybe it just needed this blast again, so that we could find each other again. The 2 years without you sucked pretty much, Iwaizumi chuckled. I also hated it without you. But I think it was the right thing to do. So please don't blame yourself, and most of all, please don't worry about it anymore. That's the past. Iwaizumi gently patted Ikoa's head. But all this doesn't change anything. We're back at the same situation as we were then. 1 week. I'll be here for another week, Iwa-chan. And then I'll leave Japan again and be in Argentina at least until the World Cup. We may be in the same situation, but this time everything is different, Carver. Ikoa frowned and looked at Iwaizumi in confusion. Iwaizumi took out the ring and looked deeply into Ikoa's eyes. Marry me.